Can you tell the difference between Georgian chain wrestling and American ground and pound? Do you know why Irish fighters keep their hands low while Russians keep theirs high? If you can't answer these questions, you're missing the entire chess match happening inside the octagon. Right now, I'm going to break down the fighting DNA of every country that matters in the UFC, and by the end, you'll be able to predict a fighter's strategy just by seeing their flag next to their name. Georgia, relentless wrestling storm. Georgia might be a small nation in the Caucasus Mountains, but in the UFC, it fights like a storm that never ends. Wrestling isn't just a sport here, it's part of the culture. Kids are raised in gyms or on rough mats in school halls, competing from the time they can walk. The Georgian style blends Greco-Roman throws, freestyle chain wrestling, and a pace that feels suffocating. It isn't built on finesse, it's built on breaking an opponent's will. The perfect embodiment, Merab Dvalishvili, nicknamed The Machine. His UFC record proves the name isn't hype. By round 3, his opponents look like they're drowning on dry land. Then, there's Ilia Topuria, a new face of Georgian MMA, though he also represents Spain. Unlike Merab, Topuria's style fuses Georgian aggression with slick boxing and jiu-jitsu. He finishes fights with brutal precision. 10 of his first 12 wins came by stoppage. Where Merab drowns you, Topuria decapitates you with overhands or strangles you with submissions. Together, they show two faces of Georgia: relentless pace and ruthless finishing. Culturally, Georgian fighters carry immense pride. Wrestling medals are displayed like family heirlooms, and UFC success is treated as a matter of national honor. When Merab beat former champion Petr Yan in 2023, he threw over 400 strikes while securing 11 takedowns, putting the entire bantamweight division on notice. Yan himself admitted afterward, "I've never felt pressure like that before." Georgians don't play chess in the cage, they flip the board. Theirs is a storm style: pace, power, punishment, and it's only just beginning to take over the UFC. Australia and New Zealand calculated violence. Australia and New Zealand weren't always on the UFC map. For years, fighters from down under had to take 14-hour flights to the US just to find good training and competition. But today, they produce champions, and their style is special: calm, patient, and technical, like chess, but with fists and kicks. The biggest name is Alexander Volkanovski, the featherweight king. He's only 5 feet 6 inches tall. But before fighting, he played professional rugby weighing over 200 pounds. Imagine a rugby tank slimming down to fight at 145 pounds and still carrying that power. That's why he can throw 200 strikes in a fight and never get tired. In his second fight with Max Holloway, Volkanovski landed 137 significant strikes, defended every single takedown, and showed how Aussies fight, with smarts, not panic. Then there's Robert Whittaker, the first UFC champion from Australia. His karate base gave him lightning-fast kicks and movement, which he used to outstrike Yoel Romero in 2 5-round wars. Fun fact, Whittaker has defended over 85% of takedowns in his career. That's why wrestlers hate fighting him. From New Zealand comes the team City Kickboxing, home of Israel Adesanya, the style bender. Izzy's kickboxing background shows why Oceania fighters are so sharp. He once outstruck Paulo Costa with 55 kicks landed to the body and legs before finishing him in round 2. Fighters like Dan Hooker and Kai Kara-France also come from that same school, proving this region is about clean striking, airtight defense, and perfect timing. The key to their style: they don't brawl wild like Brazilians or swarm like Mexicans. They download information each round. They study you, take notes with their fists, then strike when you finally make a mistake. Calm, cold, clinical. Australia and New Zealand may not have the numbers of Brazil or the US, but their champions fight like scientists in a storm. Measured violence, executed with precision. United Kingdom, the working class striker. British MMA didn't grow out of fancy gyms. It grew out of tough towns, boxing gyms above pubs, and kids learning to fight before they could drive. That's why the UK's fighting style is built on grit, cardio, and crisp boxing first. The first big UK superstar was Michael Bisping. He didn't have an Olympic wrestling background, and he wasn't a BJJ black belt either. What he had was endless cardio and hands that never stopped moving. Across his UFC career, Bisping landed 1,533 significant strikes, which was a record when he retired in 2017. He fought while half-blind in one eye after a detached retina, but still became the first British UFC champion by beating Luke Rockhold in 2016. On just 17 days' notice. Then came the new wave. Leon Edwards, born in Jamaica but raised in Birmingham, became the second UK fighter to wear gold. His style blends sharp Muay Thai with perfect timing. Remember his legendary head kick KO of Kamaru Usman at UFC 278? With just 56 seconds left, Leon delivered a left high kick that shocked the world. Before that moment, Usman had defended 97% of all head kicks thrown at him in the UFC. That one broke through other UK names like Tom Aspinall, a heavyweight with speed like a middleweight, and Arnold Allen, a featherweight with a 10-fight UFC win streak, show how diverse the British style is becoming. But the core remains the same: clean boxing, pressure, and durability. Unlike Russians, Brits don't rely on wrestling. Unlike Brazilians, they don't hunt for submissions. Their strength is making every fight a stand-up war. They sprawl, scramble, and force you back into their striking range. It's simple. It's working-class toughness in 4-ounce gloves. The UK doesn't just fight to win. They fight like they're clocking in for another hard shift. Punch by punch, jab by jab, until you break. Mexico, heart and hands. If you've ever watched a Mexican fighter, you'll notice one thing right away: they don't take a step back. This style comes from boxing culture. Mexico has produced legends like Julio César Chávez, who fought 115 times with 107 wins, and built his career on body shots and relentless pressure. The rule was simple: take one punch to give back 2 or 3 harder ones. When Mexican fighters entered MMA, that same spirit followed. Brandon Moreno from Tijuana became the first Mexican-born UFC champion in 2021. He didn't win with brute strength. He won with grit, scrambles, and endless cardio. In his 4-fight series with Davison Figueiredo, Moreno absorbed over 350 significant strikes, but never mentally broke. Even when hurt, he smiled, scrambled, and found ways to turn the fight. That's Mexican style in a nutshell. Heart beats technique. Then there's Yair Rodriguez, a highlight reel in human form. He's the guy who knocked out Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie, with a spinning upward elbow at 4:59 of the final round at UFC Denver in 2018. That's literally the last second possible in a 5-round fight. Nobody had ever landed that strike in UFC history. It looked like something out of a video game. But here's the interesting part. For years, Mexico struggled with wrestling and jiu-jitsu. There weren't enough black belts or wrestling rooms. Fighters were tough, but they got taken down easily. Now, things are changing fast. Gyms in Mexico are bringing in world-class coaches, and fighters train abroad in the US or Brazil before bringing knowledge home. The Mexican advantage has always been cardio and toughness. They don't gas out, they don't quit. Even when they're losing, they keep pushing forward. If you leave an opening, just one, they'll jump on it. So when you watch a Mexican UFC fighter, expect fireworks. They'll bleed, they'll brawl, and they'll keep walking forward. Because in Mexico, fighting isn't just sport, it's pride. Russia, pressure, and ice. If Brazil gave the world jiu-jitsu, Russia gave the world suffocation. Russian fighting style comes from a mix of Sambo, a martial art created for the Soviet military in the 1920s, freestyle wrestling, and that fight-or-freeze toughness you build growing up in the cold mountains of Dagestan or Chechnya. Kids there don't just train, they wrestle before they can spell the word. In Dagestan, wrestling mats are as common as soccer fields. By the time a boy is 10 years old, he's already had hundreds of matches. That's why Russia dominates Olympic wrestling. At the 2020 Tokyo Games, Russia won 4 wrestling golds and 3 silvers, more than almost every other country combined. This foundation creates monsters in MMA. Khabib Nurmagomedov is the perfect example. He retired undefeated at 29-0, something nobody has done in UFC history at championship level. His style was like being stuck under an avalanche. Take down, trap your limbs, maul you, whisper in your ear that you should quit, then choke you out. Fighters knew what was coming, but nobody could stop it. He absorbed only 286 strikes in 13 UFC fights. Compare that to someone like Nate Diaz, who takes that many in one fight. Then you have Islam Makhachev, Khabib's protege. Same suffocating wrestling, but with polished striking, body kicks, jabs, and setups. He's like a Khabib 2.0, and now the reigning UFC lightweight champ. But Russia isn't just grappling. Peter Yan, the former bantamweight champ from Siberia, showed the world Russian boxing. His high guard, step forward style outstruck legends like Jose Aldo. At UFC 245, he landed 194 significant strikes in 3 rounds. Cold, efficient, ruthless. So what's the Russian formula? Pressure first, break your rhythm, make you miserable, then finish clean. It's not about fun. It's about dominance, honor, and making sure the guys back home watching in the snow are proud. Russian MMA is like a bear trap. You don't escape. Ireland, Irish rhythm sniping. Ireland doesn't have the numbers of Brazil or the USA, but what it does have is style, swagger, and timing. And it all started with one man, Conor McGregor. When Conor exploded onto the UFC scene in 2013, the fight game shifted overnight. His stance was wide, almost karate-like. He wasn't bouncing like a boxer. He was sniping, southpaw, chin out, hands low, daring you to reach. So he could counter with his laser left hand. That punch became legendary. Conor knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds at UFC 194 with a single counter left. To this day, it's the fastest finish in a UFC title fight. But Conor's style wasn't just about fists, it was range and rhythm. He measured distance better than almost anyone, using feints, kicks, and timing to lure opponents into mistakes. He called it precision beats power, timing beats speed. And he proved it, finishing Chad Mendes, Dustin Poirier, Eddie Alvarez, all inside 2 rounds. Beyond the cage, Conor's psychological warfare was part of the Irish package. He talked like Muhammad Ali, predicted knockouts, and sold fights like no one else. At UFC 229 against Khabib, the pay-per-view sold 2.4 million buys, still the biggest in UFC history. Now, the new face of Irish MMA is Ian Garry. Undefeated and taller, leaner than Conor, Garry uses similar long-range weapons, jabs, teep kicks, sniper counters, but with a colder, methodical pace. Where Conor chased chaos, Ian downloads opponents round by round, then dismantles them. But here's the catch. Ireland struggles on the ground. There's no deep wrestling culture like in the US or Russia. Most Irish fighters train abroad, focusing on defensive jiu-jitsu and stand-ups rather than offensive grappling. If a Dagestani gets on top, Irish fighters often go into survival mode. Still, Irish MMA is about outthinking and outsniping. It's not brute force, it's brains, timing, and belief. And when that left hand lands, fights end fast. The United States didn't invent mixed martial arts, but it built the machine that made the UFC what it is today. And the engine of that machine? Wrestling. From the very first UFC in 1993, American wrestlers have been a force. Think about it. While Brazil brought submissions, the US brought control. Division I college wrestling, grueling, sweaty, mat-burning training, became the foundation of the American MMA style. The blueprint was simple. Take them down, hold them down, pound them out. Guys like Mark Coleman, UFC 10 and 11 champion, were the prototypes. Coleman invented what we now call ground and pound, taking wrestlers' double-leg takedowns and smashing opponents with fists and elbows from the top. That became an American signature. Then came legends like Randy Couture, a former Olympic wrestler. He won UFC titles in 2 weight classes, fought until he was 47, and showed the world that wrestling wasn't just about control, it was about strategy and cardio. And then, of course, John Jones. While not an NCAA champion, Jones's wrestling base, combined with spinning elbows and freakish reach, made him the youngest UFC champion at 23 years old. He used wrestling defensively, stuffing takedowns, controlling range, and forcing strikers and grapplers alike into his game. But American MMA isn't just about individuals, it's about systems. Gyms like American Kickboxing Academy, aka American Top Team, ATT, and Jackson Wink MMA built super camps where fighters trained across wrestling, striking, and conditioning. These gyms became factories for champions. Daniel Cormier, Kamaru Usman, Nigerian-American but trained in the US. Dustin Poirier, Jorge Masvidal, the list goes on. Here's a stat for you. As of 2023, over 60% of UFC champions had a wrestling background. That tells you how dominant this style is. Even strikers now train wrestling defense first, because without it, you won't survive. American grind wrestling is like a football playbook turned into combat. Sequences, setups, game plans. It doesn't always look flashy, but it's brutally effective. When an American wrestler gets on top, the round, and sometimes the fight, is already over. Brazil, chaos grappling. If America gave the UFC structure, Brazil gave it soul and chaos. Before gloves, weight classes, or time limits, Brazil had Vale Tudo, which literally means anything goes. No rounds, no breaks, no mercy. Fighters in backyards, circuses, and gyms would throw down until someone quit or couldn't stand. Out of that chaos came the most influential family in MMA history, the Gracies. In the 1920s, Carlos and Helio Gracie took traditional Japanese judo and jiu-jitsu, then twisted it into something smaller fighters could use against bigger ones. Their invention, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ, was all about leverage, chokes, and joint locks. It wasn't about strength, it was about technique. Fast forward to UFC 1 in 1993. Royce Gracie, skinny, 180 pounds, walked into the cage wearing a white GI. He submitted 3 men in one night, including a 260-pound brawler, and proved to the world that ground fighting wasn't just important, it was unstoppable. From that day, BJJ became the backbone of MMA. But Brazil didn't stop at the ground. They fused BJJ with their own style of Muay Thai. If traditional Thai fighters wait patiently, Brazilians attack like they're on fire. Spinning elbows, flying knees, wild kicks. It's violence with rhythm. Look at Jose Aldo, 17-fight unbeaten streak, feared for leg kicks so brutal they ended careers. Or Anderson Silva, the Spider, who went on a record 16-fight UFC win streak, knocking people out with moves that looked straight out of a kung fu movie. And then Charles Oliveira, the man with 16 UFC submissions, the most in history. He gets dropped, smiles through blood, and strangles his way back to victory. That's Brazil in a nutshell. Pressure, pace, and pain. Even legends like Amanda Nunes, the Lioness, carried the chaos, becoming the first woman to hold 2 UFC belts at once. Brazilian fighters don't just fight, they ambush. They look wild, but there's a plan underneath. Break your rhythm, break your will, and finish the fight. And that's why when you talk about MMA, you can't escape Brazil. They didn't just contribute to UFC, they built half the DNA. From Russia's ice to Brazil's chaos, every nation fights with its own DNA. Which country's style do you think dominates the UFC? Drop a comment, smash subscribe, and let's debate.